Recently I did a video on a set of HTML tools called Emmet, specifically the ones made to work within Vim, and in the comment section for that video, someone actually made a really good point. So they said, Emmet seems really cool, but I don't see how it's that practical, so could you show a bit more of a practical example of how this actually works? And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea, so that's what we're going to be doing today. So what we're going to be doing is basically remaking this page here. So I'm going to show you what it actually looks like. So we have a header up the top here, we have a very rudimentary nav bar, we have a couple of sections here, there's an image in here, there's a footer in here, and we have a second page as well. So on the second page here, we have a list, and we have a table, as well as the same header, nav bar, and footer components that we saw on the first page. So let's see how this would actually work. Okay, so if you haven't seen that first video I did in Emmet, or you don't at least have a rudimentary understanding of how this plugin actually works, I would recommend actually going and watching that video because I will be glossing over some of the important details, specifically stuff related to the syntax. Now, places where it's actually really important to what I'm talking about, I will cover it again. But if you want a full rundown of the syntax and all of the commands and everything that Emmet can actually do, I would recommend going and watching that video first because it will make following along this one much easier. So what we're going to need to do first up, I've got this just blank folder here. What we're going to need to do is actually create our files. So I'm going to create two files in here. I'm going to make a index.html file. And the second one I'm going to make is just going to be called colors.html. And we'll get back to the colors.html one afterwards, but we'll start inside of the index.html. So in here, I guess already know what the layout of the document actually looks like. So what I could do is I could go and generate a command that will generate the entire page with one command. But the problem with doing this is that most of the time you either don't know what the layout of the document is actually going to be, or maybe as you're writing the document, you realize, okay, well, I thought I was going to lay it out like this, but now I realize, well, I actually wanted to do it like this. So instead of trying to make one massive abbreviation, which might be buggy and will take a long time to write and might contain things you don't actually need in the end, what it's going to be much easier to do is generate a bunch of little abbreviations. So I want to generate a list here with some list elements. I want to generate a div, and it's going to have a header and a paragraph in it. It's much easier to generate stuff like that rather than trying to generate everything at once, even if you think you know what the layout is actually going to be. Now, you can obviously go and generate that full layout if you want to. I would just suggest against doing that. Now, the first thing we're going to do is actually generate the basic template for the page. So normally, you're obviously going to have an HTML5 element, or obviously you're always going to have an HTML5 element. Now, what this is going to do is basically generate all of the basic stuff that you actually need for a document like this. So you have specifying it's an HTML document, then you have your HTML tags, your head tags, the meta, title, and the body. But there's a lot of other stuff that I will always add to a page when I actually am writing one. So I will always also have a header, a nav, a main, and a footer. Now, sometimes you don't always need the nav if you're going to do the nav in a bit of a different way, but I like to include it most of the time. So if we just make a child of the HTML5 element, we're going to make this a header. And we're going to add a couple of siblings to this as well. So we're going to have a nav as a sibling, a main as a sibling, and a footer as a sibling. So if we go and generate this now, as you can see, we have the same HTML5 tags, but we have 4 tags inside of this. So this is just the absolute basic layout for what I like to do when I'm actually writing a document like this. But there's a couple of things we can add to this as well in this actual statement. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a grouping. So if we set up a grouping around this header, what this is basically going to let us do is make basically as many children to this element as we want without actually having to go up a bunch of levels. So as you can see in here, we've gone down 4 levels, but once we actually leave this grouping, we're going to be at the same level that we were out here. So any of the level traversals that happen within a group are basically null once you actually leave that group. So I'll show you what I mean. Now, if we go and actually generate this page here, as you can see, we went down 4 levels, making all of these T tags here. And as soon as we left the group, this nav element is still considered to be a sibling of the header element, because what it's actually doing is setting the nav to be a sibling of this group. Rather than being a sibling of the last tag in the group, it's a sibling of the entire group as a whole, and the location of that group is as a child of the HTML5 element. So I think the best way to demonstrate this is to actually remove the grouping and show you what actually happens then. So what's happening now is this nav is basically being set as a sibling to this T element right here, rather than as a sibling to this actual grouping. So if I go and actually generate this now, as you can see, the page doesn't really make any sense. So if we wanted that to be the exact same thing we had before, what we would have to do is actually go up a couple of levels. So I think, what is that, 4 levels? This will actually generate the exact same thing we had before. So if we go and generate this now, as you can see, the nav is a sibling to the header. But that's a little bit confusing, so generally it's going to be much easier to do level traversals like this inside of a group. But let's actually get rid of these tags here and actually put something in that might actually be useful. So let's say we wanted this header to be an h1 tag wrapped in an anchor tag, and when we click on that anchor tag, it's going to take us back to index.html. So basically to do this, what we'd have to do is set a child of the header tag as an anchor, and then set a child of that to be an h1. And if we go and generate this now, as you can see, we have an anchor tag with an h1 inside of it. But as you can see, the href isn't actually being set. It's basically just being set to a blank string. But we can actually set this while we're actually writing the abbreviation. So let's go back to the abbreviation. And what we're going to do is set an attribute on this anchor tag. And the attribute we're going to set is the href attribute. So this is basically just being set the way that you would normally set it. So if we go and generate this again, as you can see, anchor tag, index.html as the href. But we can also go and set the value for this h1 while we're actually doing this as well. And let's say we want the value for this one to just be set to Brodie's favorite colors. Now, if I make a spelling mistake somewhere along the way, don't expect me to fix it. Generate that. Now that's actually setting the content of that h1 tag. But let's say we also want to set the content of the nav as well. So we know that in a nav, we're going to have a couple of links in here. So I already know that we're going to have 2 pages on this website. So what we're going to do is make an anchor tag. And as I said, we're going to have 2 of them. So if we do *2, that's going to mean generate 2. So go and generate this page now. As you can see, we now have 2 anchor tags in here. But we also want to have a tooltip on these. So let's actually set the tooltip attribute while we're doing this as well. So title equals, and we're just going to leave it as a blank title so we can go and fill that in afterwards ourselves. Because in this case, it would be way more annoying to set up the abbreviation to go and fill those in for us. So I think this is probably enough for adding into this abbreviation. So let's move on to the next bit. Now, one thing to keep in mind, as you saw with what we were doing there, when you're writing stuff with Emmet, there's sort of a trade-off between doing it during generation and then doing it afterwards, because obviously you're in a text editor, you can go and fill all of this stuff in by yourself. So you have to decide, okay, is it going to be quicker to write it inside of Emmet, or is it going to be quicker to just write it by hand? Sometimes it's going to be way quicker to just do it by hand in the case of having to make basically a list and then fill in different values in each of the things in the list. In that case, it's way quicker to just do it afterwards. But if it's something where you just want a bunch of blank text or you want a bunch of filler text, in those cases, it's going to be quicker to do it during generations. So once you start working with Emmet, you'll start to pick this up pretty quickly. So inside of the main tag here, we want a couple of things. So we want a couple of different sections, and I think we want 3 sections in here. So what we're going to do is write section *3. So that means make 3 sections, and we're going to have all of these sections containing h2 elements. So if we just make a child of this and set it to h2, that will actually go and do that. But I also want to have all of these have ID tags so we could actually jump directly to it. Now, there's a problem with setting an ID by just using a hash, and the problem with that is you can't actually just have a blank ID in this case. So if we were to go and generate it like this, as you can see, it basically just ignores that tag. So what we actually have to do if we want to set a blank ID is use the attribute setter. So in this case, the square brackets, ID equals nothing. Now, another solution for this is to just do numbered IDs. So if you were to instead do something like hash and then give it a $, what that's going to do is basically just go and number all of these h2 elements. But I think it's going to be much easier to actually have these elements be given proper names. So if you were to say, I want to jump to the about section, or I want to jump to the donate section, rather than saying I want to jump to section 2, I want to jump to section 3, the properly named IDs is going to be a bit more descriptive. So we're just going to leave these as blank IDs, and I'll go fill these in later. And I also want to go set a class attribute for these H2 elements as well, just so it's going to be easy to set the CSS on them. So I'm going to say the class attribute is going to be set to smaller. And I also want to have a paragraph tag in here as well. So if we just make a sibling to that H2 and set it to paragraph, now we'll actually have that paragraph. So as you can see, section H2 paragraph, section H2 paragraph, section H2 paragraph. So that worked as we would expect. But let's say we don't just want these paragraph tags to be empty. What we can actually do is use the built-in lorem ipsum generator inside of Emmet. So this is basically just going to add some filler text into these. So if we just make a child of this paragraph tag and set it to be lorem, and we go and generate this now, as you can see, we have a bunch of paragraphs, and now all of them actually have some filler text in them. So if we actually go and look at what this website looks like, as you'll see, it's coming along pretty well. So we're most of the way there. Now, I haven't actually filled in things like the navbar elements or the headers, but I'll go and do those off camera once we've actually finished off the template. So let's go back to the document and see if there's anything else we actually need to be doing. So let's say in this second section here, we realize we don't actually have enough paragraphs. So what we can do here is do p star, and then let's say we know we need 2 extra paragraphs. So if we do p star 2, and then make the child of these as lorem, we'll have 2 extra paragraphs that automatically have some filler text in them. So as you can see, this is coming along pretty well now. Now there's one more thing that I want to do in this section, and that's just add an image into this last section down here. So if we go and basically make an image tag, so if we go and set this here, as you can see, it has a source and it has an alt. So we can either set these here, or we can actually set these in the attribute setter inside of Emmet. So just for the sake of this video, let's actually do them inside of the attribute setter. So if we just make a square bracket, and let's set the source, and we're going to set the source to be resources/youtube.png. Now I don't actually have an image located in this location, but assuming I did, this would basically be setting the image to that. And let's set the alt as well. So the alt is going to just be set to YouTube logo. And let's set the title of it as well. So the title, as I said earlier, is the tooltip. So we'll set this also to YouTube logo. Cool. So we go and save this now and reopen the page. And that, I forgot to actually generate, I forgot to generate the abbreviation. So don't forget to do that. Otherwise, you know, it's not really going to be that useful. So go and generate the abbreviation. And as you can see, we now have an image tag with all of those values being set. So if we now go back over to the page, as you can see, the alt text is set to logo. We hover over this, we have the title we want. And because I don't actually have an image located in that location, we can't actually see the image. So off camera, I'm going to go and actually fill in the stuff that we didn't need to do with Emmet, just so we can see what this complete page actually looks like. Okay, so everything I did off camera was just setting some string values. I didn't actually go and use any of the abbreviations. So if we actually go and look at this page now, as you're going to see, we have our navbar being filled out, we have our header, and we also have our footer. So let's move on to the colors page and see what we're actually going to add to this one. Okay, so the only thing we have on the page right now is the absolute basic template. So I didn't really think there was a point to go over this again. It just made sense to go and fill this in off camera. So what we're going to do on this page, the first thing at least, is actually go and generate a list of my favorite colors. Now, I obviously could go and make the list first and then go and actually fill out the list, but I think there might be a better way to do this. So let's say that I know that my favorite colors are red, yellow, and also blue. So what we can do with this is we can actually go and visual select this and then go and generate a abbreviation around this actual content. So what I mean by this is let's actually go and run our Emmet command. And what we can do here is start writing out the abbreviation like we normally would. So we're going to have a section, and actually zooming in actually broke everything, but doesn't matter, you'll see it in a second again. So let's say we want a section, we want this to contain an H2, and we want a sibling that is going to be a UL tag with basically children, which will be LI tags. Now, how do we actually specify that we want to have multiple LI tags? Because if we just go and generate it like this, so we just press enter here, as you can see, all of the colors have just been added to a single UL tag, and that's not really what we actually want to see happen. What we want to see is have all of these elements be in their own separate li tags. Now, if you were following along earlier, what you might think we would do is something like this. So we'll do *3 because we obviously have 3 elements, so we want basically 3 li tags. Now, you're close, but it's actually kind of wrong. So if we go and generate this now, as you can see, we get a ton of li tags. Now, I don't know why we get so many, but all of these have actually been added to their own separate li tags, and then we have a bunch of empty ones. So this isn't how we do it. There is a slightly different way. So what we can actually do is just let Emmet work out how many elements there actually are. So if we go and generate this again, but this time actually drop the number. So just do a star instead. What this is going to do is say, okay, I have some text here. Emmet, you can work out how many lines I have and how many elements I actually need. So let's go and generate this now. This is what we actually wanted to see happen. So we have a UL and it has 3 li tags in it. But let's say we also wanted to actually have these be in anchor tags. So let's go and generate this again. And we're going to have a child that is going to be an anchor tag. Now, what you might think is, okay, well, do we put the asterisk at the end here, or do we put it after the li? So let's just put it after the a and see what actually happens. So if we generate this now, all of the colors have been put into a single li tag, but they're all in individual anchor tags. So that is wrong there. What you actually want to do is have the asterisk at the thing that you want to generate multiple of. So in this case, that is going to be on the li tag. So if we put it back on the li tag and rerun this, as you can see, we get what we had expected. So we have these 3 individual li tags for each of the individual lines, and then all of the text is inside of their own individual anchor tags. So this seems to be exactly what we want to see happen. And the other thing I want is a separate section, but this one is going to contain a table. And what I'm going to show you here is basically how to do implicit tag generation. So we want a section, we want that to have a child, which is an h2, and we want that to have a sibling, which is a table. So what we could do is do something a little like so. I'm just going to copy it over because it's a really long command. So basically what this is we have a section, we have a h2 as a child, we have a sibling to that h2, which is a table, and that table contains t-head elements, which contains tr elements, and that one tr contains 4 table heads. And then the sibling to that is going to be a t-body, and that's going to contain 5 table rows, and each of those table rows are going to contain 4 table datas. So if we go and generate this now, as you'll see, we get what looks to be a pretty functional HTML table. So there's a bunch of data in here. It seems to work perfectly fine as an HTML table. But there might be a slightly easier way to actually write this out. So instead of actually explicitly saying, okay, we want table rows and then we want table data, we can say, okay, Emmet probably knows that a table contains table rows and table data, so why don't we just let Emmet handle it itself? Now, there's a slight problem with doing this, and that is that you actually have to specify something for Emmet to actually grab onto. So whether that is a class or an ID, you can't just say, okay, well, we want to have 5 of something here and we want to have 4 of something here. This won't actually work. If we go and generate this, as you can see, that doesn't work. What you actually have to do is say, okay, well, I want this to have some sort of class name here or some sort of ID name, and I also want this to have some sort of class name or some sort of ID name, and then you can go and generate this, and as you can see, all of them have classes, and we didn't actually have to write out the tag name. Emmet just automatically knew, okay, the child to a t-body is going to be a tr, and the child to a tr is going to be a td. Now, as for doing it inside of the head, it's a little bit different. So the child to a tr is always going to be implicitly a td. It won't ever be a th, and that's because Emmet only takes into consideration the current tag rather than having a look at whatever the parent of that tag actually was. So if we go and just implicitly generate this here, so if we're just going to call this, I don't know, we'll just call it th as the class, and let's generate this now. As you can see, these are all TDs rather than being THs. Now, HTML is pretty lenient about what you actually do, so this will actually work perfectly fine. But if you want it to be a proper HTML5 table, you actually do have to say, okay, well, I want my T head to contain a TR and that to contain some THs. You can't just leave that up to implicit generation, as nice as that actually would be to do. So let's just take this back to containing TH elements rather than the implicitly generated TDs, and generate this now. And as you can see, we have our massive table here. So I'm going to cut back to when I've actually filled in all of the data. And as you'll see, we'll have basically the exact same page that I showed you at the start of the video. Okay, so this is going to look a tad different because I added in an extra H2 element that wasn't originally there, and I also added an extra row to the table that wasn't already there, but it's still basically the same thing. So as we can see, we have the favorite colors list, we have the color attribute table, and the rest of the template is basically the same. And if we go back to the home page, as you can see, we have all of these different sections in here, and these match up perfectly with the original document. So as you can see, it's really, really easy to actually generate a page using Emmet. Now, obviously, if you go into this without actually knowing the exact format of the actual page, it won't just take you 15 or 20 minutes, however long this video was. It will take a bit longer, but if you know that, okay, I want this component here, so I want a div that contains an H2 and a paragraph, writing that out in Emmet is so much quicker than, at worst, trying to write out the tags manually, and I guess at best would be something like generating them with something such as COC. I still use COC very frequently because there are some places where it doesn't really make sense to use Emmet, it's just a little bit inconvenient, or for whatever reason, it just doesn't make sense to use Emmet in that location. So using COC still makes a lot of sense, but if you have a completely blank page or you have completely blank lines, using Emmet might actually be a massive improvement to your actual workflow. So if you're unsure about Emmet and not really sure how it was actually practical, hopefully after this video you can see, okay, well, Emmet might actually be a really useful tool to use. So before I go, I would like to thank my patrons. So a special thank you to Joachim, Craig, Nathan, Andrew, Montezar, Peter D. Road, Tony, Chris, Donald, and Zilva. If you want to join the Patreon, there'll be a link to that down below, as well as my Amazon affiliate links where you can buy the gear using this channel, or anything else you want, and I'll get a small kickback for it. Also, I'm going to go check out my podcast. That is Tech of a Tea, available on Library and YouTube, and the audio version available wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Also, remember to go smash that like button and leave me a comment down below, and remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below as well. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.